Hi, and welcome back to our 40 days study, where we're looking at 40 days in the life of Jesus. I want to jump right in today to Luke chapter 19, a fascinating story about breaking down barriers. We're going to see how that in this story, there are a lot of barriers between Zacchaeus and Jesus. And we're going to see how that Jesus works and Zacchaeus works to overcome the barriers between them. And that's important. We've already established something Jesus said. Jesus said, if you seek me, you're going to find me. And we believe that that's true. And I want you to gather that that's at play in the story. Zacchaeus is seeking Jesus. Jesus knows that. He notices that. And he makes sure to make contact with Zacchaeus. Now, there are a lot of barriers in the story, and we're going to look at some of those barriers as we go through it very quickly together. Now, beyond the barriers, though, what we need to see is that whatever those differences were, whatever those obstacles were, whatever those things were that were separating Zacchaeus and Jesus, once Jesus has entered that conversation with Zacchaeus, the barriers will quickly fade away. And Zacchaeus will accept Jesus. And then, once he has accepted Jesus, check this out, he begins to work at doing away with the barriers between him and his fellow man. It's kind of a fascinating story, and it sets up very well for us the events that are coming in the very next and near future in the Jesus story. The story of the Passion Week, and that moment where Jesus goes to the cross, where he once and for all destroys the final barrier between us and God, the barrier of sin. But we'll get to that more in a few sessions. But today, let's focus in on Luke 19. It says that Jesus entered Jericho and he was passing through. And there was a man there whose name was Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and he was wealthy. Now there are two things there that should tip us off. One, people in that time hated the tax collectors because they were guilty of a kind of extortion. In essence, Rome said, you can collect this amount and turn it into us. So let's say for our sake and our currency, you have to take a $10 tax. Now, if you can get them to pay you more than $10, by all means, charge them whatever you want. So the actual tax might be $10, but he could charge 20 or 30 or 40. And there wasn't very much that people could do about it. It was a system that was rigged against them. It was meant to ensure that Rome would get their money. So because of this was a kind of a corrupt system, and this is something that Zacchaeus would have found that he was at odds. He wouldn't have been allowed to go worship, as an example, at the local synagogue. And he would have been at odds with the people around him. He would not have been a person they wanted to see. They weren't happy to see the tax man coming. There was a barrier there. There was another barrier. Many of the people that Jesus interacts with are not wealthy. Some are, but most are not wealthy. And wealth in itself was a kind of barrier at times. In fact, Jesus would once say, right, it's easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. So there were some real barriers there in terms of his wealth. Sadly, wealth also has the capacity to separate us from our fellow man. It can cause us to think more of our own interests than the interests of others. It's not that wealth is wrong or it's proverbially bad to be wealthy, but it's that it's an added kind of a temptation in our life, and one that we have to be careful. As God said when he was dealing with Cain, sin is crouching at the door, and you must master it or it will master you. And that is never more true than when it comes to the idea of wealth. And sadly, many people thinking they are the master of the things they have, and that they have it all, truly have become the servant to that thing that they have. And they serve that wealth very diligently and in ways that sometimes separate them from God, from their families, and from others. Just a warning. So it says in the story that there was this man, Zacchaeus, and there was a barrier. He was a tax collector. He was wealthy. But he wanted to see who Jesus was. And I want to say something about that desire. And I want to emphasize again Jesus' words. If you seek me, you'll find me. And so Zacchaeus wants to see Jesus. It doesn't necessarily convey the sense at this point that he wants to have his life turned upside down by Jesus. He just wants to see him. He's curious about him. Jesus' popularity has been growing again. And he wants to know more about this Jesus. But there's another obstacle. This time it's a physical limitation that keeps him away from God. This time it says that he was unable to see because he was short and he couldn't see over the crowd. Now here Zacchaeus is seen kind of working to overcome the obstacles. And he runs ahead of the crowd and he climbs up a sycamore fig tree so he could be up on the branches and see Jesus since he was coming that way. Now here's the incredible part of the story. When Jesus reaches the spot, he looks up and he says to him, "Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must," and I want to emphasize that word, I must stay at your house today. So Zacchaeus came down and at once, and he welcomed Jesus gladly. Now, barriers. All the people saw this. They began to mutter, "Jesus has gone to be the guest of a sinner." Talk about a barrier. Sin is the final and great barrier, isn't it? Everyone knew his reputation. But Zacchaeus stood up in the presence of Jesus and he said to Jesus, he said, "Look, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor. And if I have cheated anyone out of anything, I will pay it back, and I will pay back 4 times the amount." Now, this is an incredible part of the story, and I've always loved the Zacchaeus story because once he's come to Jesus, well, once he's accepted Jesus into his home and into his heart, everything has changed. And he has moved quickly to say, "My new faith has changed me." I think there are a lot of people who are actually looking for a change. Life has gotten routine, comfortable, ordinary, and we're looking for something different. We long for, there are a lot of us that are looking for something powerful, and we want something more than what's been. Jesus offers that. He offered that opportunity to Zacchaeus, something more. And so Zacchaeus found himself changed. And if you come to Jesus, I want you to understand that you will find something more. Jesus will change us in powerful and positive ways. In fact, he then begins the work of transforming us into his likeness. So we become less like that old person that was bound by sin and more like the person who is walking step by step with Jesus. We become more like Jesus. Zacchaeus is overwhelmed with generosity. And so as he does so, he's generously trying to make his situation right with others. And Jesus says to him, today, salvation has come to this house, because this man too is a son of Abraham. And here, one of the most important lines, and it explains the mission of Jesus was always to be a boundary breaker. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost. He came to set the captives free, to break away the bars and the chains that held us in bondage, both figuratively and also those things that separated people literally. And we'll see how that unfolds in the days that follow the resurrection. Jesus removed the barriers. I hope that this story encourages you. If Jesus responded to the seeking of Zacchaeus, a known sinner, an extortionist, and he gave Zacchaeus a second chance, you can be certain that when you reach out to him, he responds to you as well. I hope you've enjoyed today's message and that you're enjoying this time in our study of the 40 days of the life of Jesus. God bless you.